be brief and get it done. But listen, we're going to be talking about a lot today. We're going to be talking about imagining your past. Now, next week we'll be talking about remembering, or let's say it this way. Next week we'll be talking about remembering your future. Today we'll be talking about imagining your past. So, like I said, I'll be brief. I don't want to make any adjustments to the phone because it's on this bracket and I don't want to knock it off. So, we're going to go on and get started. Again, for those who will be watching the video later on. And like I said, I am sensitive. Today is game day, so I'll try to keep this brief, whatever that means. But for those who are interested in transformation, this is going to be a really great topic. Let me go on and drink a little water before we get started. It's funny when you're getting ready to record, you got 100 things that come up prior to, getting ready to record. So I worked through most of those 100 things. Everything else will wait till after I finish the recording. But again, we're going to be talking about imagining your past. Now, and next week, like I said, we're going to be talking about remembering. No, we're not. We're going to be imagining your past, remembering your future. So that's next week. But let's go on and get started. We're going to be talking as many as we can, the 10 principles of imagining your past. And as you begin to understand this, you'll begin to understand that you can transform your past. A lot of us are stuck. I was just posting in my my Facebook group about money and how many of the challenges that we face in spiritual communities is finance. But the funny thing is, nobody wants to talk about finances, or the subject of finances is taboo. When you start talking about making money and, offering courses, it becomes very taboo in the spiritual community. But then we wonder why there's so much lack in the spiritual community, because we have this thing about money that's not equal to what it is that we say that we want to manifest. We say we want to manifest a lot of money, but we have all these barriers about money. So as I spoke in my Facebook group, we're going to disband that. We're going to talk about those things. We're going to overcome those things, and we're going to break those barriers that cause us to have these money issues. But a lot of that's basically from imagining our past. We got to imagine a different past. We were programmed early on, and a lot of that programming was purposeful. And a lot of this programming didn't just happen with your generation or your family. It happened for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And the programming is purposeful. It's funny, I was reading a book the other day, and they were talking about money. It was called The Money Code. You can find it on YouTube. And the Money Code was talking about how, when we're talking about the religious community, one of the poorest religious communities is that of evangelicals. And most of that is because of we've been programmed to believe that we're going to get ours in the hereafter. And we've been also programmed to believe that money's evil, money's bad. And so until we reprogram or reimagine our past, we're going to keep running into money barriers because, of course, we believe that money's evil. Now, the funny thing is, all of what we do in Christianity, so-called, is based off of Judaism. And Judaism believes just the opposite about money. Young Jewish kids early on are taught about how to make money, how the benefits of money and so forth. And we're told just the contrary. And matter of fact, even if we bring up the subject of money, a lot of people in the Christian community turn off immediately. That's programming. And we say, well, that's taught about. No, it's what the teachers of the Bible pull from the Bible. But there's a lot of instances in the Bible that teaches about the abundance mindset. Jesus says, listen, I've come that you might have life and that you might have it more abundantly. Now, evangelical will come back and say, well, that's not what that really didn't mean monetarily. And we start buying into that. My whole point about this whole program today is us reprogramming our psychology and our belief system. Because if that doesn't change, then of course, our situations, our money, our relationships, our health, none of those things will change. I was speaking with a friend recently, and I thought that she was pretty decent as far as in her health. As we went on in our conversations, she was telling me about some health issues that she was having. I was surprised. Now, not because you think that everybody's like immune from health issues. but I was surprised because of some of the issues that she was having. But what I come to realize after our conversation was that was the belief in her family that they had these particular ailments in their life. So even though her diet was fairly decent and so forth, she was having the ailments that she believed that her family would have. And so what are we believing from our past that's in our present that we don't like? We're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about how to overcome some of those things. So listen, first, you have to begin rewriting your story. I often tell the story about when years ago, my sister and I were having a conversation about health. And she was saying that, well, diabetes runs in our family. I said, no, not the case. I said, diabetes runs in your family because you're having the same mindset and the same belief systems as those who have gone before us. That's not my scenario. That's not the story. So what about you, creators? What are your money stories? What are your relationship stories? What are your health stories? See, depending upon those stories that you continue to tell yourself, that's what's going to keep showing up in your life. Now, you say, well, Coach, how can I change the story? You rewrite it. Now, you say, well, how do I rewrite my story? Well, you do it this way. You start visualizing, imagining, believing, pretending a different story. Now, some of you are going to say, well, that's just make believe. That stuff's not real. That's how your imagination, that's how your subconscious mind works, through these mental images. Now, often we're telling ourselves, the same story repeatedly. And so we say, well, that's who I am. If you begin to change, rewrite, retell the story, point in case, my one of the granddaughters, she was here going to school. And so she had this project that we were working on the other night. And so she says, she had to have something. She created this beautiful shoebox, and within it, she had to have two items that represented something that she enjoyed doing. And she had this dilemma, and she didn't know what to put in the box. And I told her, I said, listen, you're writing the story. It doesn't matter what you put in the box. What matters is the story that you're telling, what's in the box. And I said, you're the author of the story. I said, you're overcomplicating this. I said, you're going into school. I said, you tell the story, whatever story you want to tell about these items. It doesn't matter. The teacher just wants to see you articulate what's important to you. I said, so whatever you put in the box, she finally decided what she's going to put in the box, and she finally completed the project. But many of us are just like my granddaughter. We're in a dilemma, and we keep wondering what story we want to tell ourselves. And so when we start talking about religion, we start talking about politics, we start talking about jobs, money, our education, we have all these stories. And we say that I am the composite of these stories. But understand this, the stories are only powerful because that's the story that you keep telling yourself. You say that right now, say that you want to do spiritual work, you want to change people's lives, you want to teach and so forth. And you say, well, I don't have the education, I don't know. It doesn't matter. What matters is you get out and start sharing your story. I listen to some of these people that tell some of these stories, and some of these guys are phenomenal, and others are okay. But each person is telling their story. And whether I think it's dynamic or not, there's an audience that is listening and captivated by that story. But many of us believe that we have to have certain credentials, we have to have certain coaching certificates. I was that person. That's why I got certified in hypnotherapy. That's why I got certified as a coach, NLP, because I believed at that time that those things were required. What your audience is looking for you, let me say it again. What your audience is looking for from you is results. So if you can help them get the results that they want, then they're going to be willing to compensate you. And a lot of times people, they'll reach out to me for mentoring and so forth. I do these programs on a daily, weekly basis as a means of mentoring. But my title is Coach DeCarlo. So if you want one-on-one coaching, we're not going to call it mentor, we're going to call it coaching. Now, some people say, well, Coach, you shouldn't do that. But listen, I've got literally thousands of videos out there teaching you how to do mindset and all this other stuff. If you're serious, then you start pouring that information into yourself. If you want to go further and you want to go deeper, then that's called an investment in yourself. Now, I know that within this community, again, we already started talking about the issue of money. We have to begin to change what it is that we believe about money. So, listen, let me say this. I woke up this morning, this was in my spirit, and it said, listen, if you're not offering product, service, and knowledge, then you have a hobby. Many of us start this work, and because we're fearful of what other people are going to believe about us for asking compensation for what it is that we do, we don't offer services. But listen, the world will not be transformed by you, by what it is that you know, without you offering products, service, and knowledge. Now, again, my job is not to convince other people. People talk about Neville Goddard, and I had put something in my Facebook group, and basically it was talking about Neville. Neville, when he did his program, people say that he didn't charge. That's not the case. He charged an entry fee. That entry fee was anywhere from $2 to $3. With that entry fee, then of course you got into the building. He did not come and start passing a tray around or anything like that. He didn't ask for more money once you paid entrance into his talk. But now understand this, he was in the Wilshire Ebell Theater. It seated 1,600 people. At $2 to $3 a head, he was getting literally over about $3,000. Now let's say that the cost of the building for him to rent that up probably cost $300 to $500. You take that out, he was still making well over $3,000 a talk. Now you got to understand, in 1960s, 1970s, that was a lot of money. Now you multiply that, if he was doing that for a period of time, let's say 5-6 days. My whole point to you, Neville was not some poor, struggling speaker once he got started and he was packing audiences. Neither was Joseph Murphy. These guys were not, these guys were the best of their times. And both of these guys were outstanding businessmen. Joseph Murphy had a talk with my mentor, Lindo, and he said, listen, you're doing all these talks. You shouldn't be doing all these talks for free. He said the labor is worthy of his hire. And, because like I said, Mr. Lindo at that time was just, giving these presentations. He had the Metaphysical Art Theater and people would come in and you have all these talks. And Joseph Murphy said, listen, you need to be charging people for the information, the knowledge that you have. Now, is it solely about making money? No. What I want you to do is begin to value who you are. And until you begin to value who you are, the truth of the matter is nobody else is going to value you. I've purchased products, tens of thousands of dollars worth of products. I'm a informational product junkie. I am. I have literally probably tens of thousands of programs of all the products that I purchased one product, and when I was purchasing it, the guy, it looked like it was an outstanding product. But the guy had priced his product so low that I'm like, if he doesn't value this product, then I don't think it's going to be worth my investment. It could have been a great program. My whole point to you, when you start looking at scripture, it says give, and it shall be given to you. Pressed down, shaken together, running over. Will people pour into your bosom? The reason why many of us in this community aren't prospering is because we have so many ideologies that have been programmed. It's not even our fault. These things have been purposely programmed in our minds early on for literally thousands of years now. And the whole point was to separate you from this thing called currency. And like I said, who we're mirroring ourselves off of, they don't even believe in poverty as a mindset. When we look at the Jewish community, hate them, love them, whatever you think about them, they're the most prosperous people in the world. And yet they're not this large majority of people, but they have a different mindset about money. They see money as life force, life energy being expelled. And they realize that the labor is worthy of his hire. My whole point to you, as we're reimagining our past, we have to have a different conversation about this thing we call money. Don't look at it as evil, but look at it as an extension of yourself. If you're providing a service, then you need to be compensated for that service. That's how we don't look at Gucci. We don't look at any of the name brands. And because they're saying, well, we're going to charge you, matter of fact, we'll pay premium products. I said in one of my talks, I did a research, and I said, well, if the human being was being valued for the technology within that human being, how much would that human being be worth? And the research came back to anywhere from, it's going to blow your mind, anywhere from $6 to $10 trillion is what you're worth. And we value ourselves far less than that. What I'm saying to you as creators is you have to begin valuing yourself. As you begin rewriting your story and valuing yourself, other people are going to value in what it is that you have to offer. But until that happens, nobody else is going to value if you don't value yourself. So let's move forward. Rewrite your story. Memory is malleable. It's not fixed. We think that we live in this past, present, future, and we think that that's all there is. The truth of the matter is there's only now. And you can reshape, restate your past. If you start seeing your past differently, let's say with the subject of money, and let's say you see yourself as a kid and you see yourself working these different jobs and doing these different hobbies, and people were paying you handsomely for doing it. When you step back into your present, now you're going to see that you're worthy of the things that you do because you see yourself as being more valuable. But if you continue to reimagine lack, loss, and limitation, when you come back to your present, then that's what you're going to outpicture into what we call reality. Don't look at your past as being fixed. Look at it as something that's pliable, something that can be changed. And what you start reimagining about your past is going to begin to show up in your present, and then it's going to be outpictured into your future. Begin to act as if, make believe, pretend, write a new story about the past that you wanted. If it wasn't the past that, say that you didn't come from a happy upbringing, whatever, retell the story. Now, most of you are going to say, well, coach, that's just make believe. It's fairy tale. Nobody's going to buy that. Your subconscious mind will buy it. And that's the only thing that matters. Why? As you begin to rewrite the stories, there was a series, a movie a few years back, and it was about this girl that came from this probably lower middle class environment. But she said that she was wealthy. And she started to act as if she was wealthy, and everybody around her started to treat her as though she was wealthy. People started giving her money. Now, I'm not telling you to be deceptive, but this is for you. This is you reprogramming your past. A lot of us are stuck in old money stories, old money paradigms, and because we're stuck in those old money paradigms, we keep living out the old money paradigms. If you want to change the money paradigms, if you want to change the relationship paradigms, if you want to change the health paradigms, tell yourself a new story. As you begin reimagining that story, there's something that's going to happen, and I'll talk about this in a little bit. There's something going to happen in your body, in your physiological system. Your mindset is going to start to rewire itself. They call that plasticity. And all of a sudden, let's say about aches and pains, you had a fall when you were a kid, and you keep remembering that fall. But now what you do is go back and you see yourself catching yourself before the fall. All of a sudden, you keep doing this repeatedly. You're thinking, it really don't make a difference. But the pain that you used to notice from the experience of having the fall no longer exists. You've rewired and changed your physiological system. In doing that, listen, they say this, that the body is remaking itself, literally remaking itself every 11 months. Why do we keep remaking the same aches, pains, and old stories and old paradigms and so forth? Because we believe that's who we are. What would happen if you started telling yourself a different story repeatedly, imagining, seeing yourself differently? Who would you be in 11 months from now? Who would you be physically? What would your health be like? What would your finances be like? What would your relationships be like if you started telling yourself a different story 11 months from now? It doesn't have to take that long. I'm just giving you a time frame. It can happen immediately. It can happen overnight. You are not fixed by your past. Your past only exists because that's what you keep telling yourself. There was a movie years ago, and I like making reference of it. It was called Groundhog Day, Bill Murray. And he kept living the same story. You know, somebody would fall and he would catch them before they fell, or somebody would drop something and he would catch them because he knew what was going to happen in that day. The reason why we still have the same money paradigms, the reason why we still have the relationship paradigms, the reason why we still have the same health, because we keep reliving the same story. Now, we believe that that story is who we are. And I'm going to have to hit you with what I normally hit you with. Your energy being, a spiritual being, a vibrational being, having a human experience. Why is this relevant? Whatever you're vibrating, most often, that's what keeps showing up in your life. When you start changing what it is that you're vibrating, you're going to get different results in your life. Most of us think that these things are fixed. Because we think that they're fixed, we think that reality is fixed. Reality isn't the fixed. Reality isn't the fix. Reality isn't the fix. Reality is the mirror. The fix is the belief system. As you start believing differently, as you start holding different beliefs, concepts, and so forth, your reality is going to shift. I've seen this not only in my own life, but in my siblings' lives and friends' lives and strangers' lives. When you start believing something different, not all at once, for the most part, things are going to start showing up differently in your life. My whole point in this point is that the past isn't fixed. It's only fixed because we keep retelling the same stories that to anyone who will listen, and primarily as to ourselves. And we say, well, that's the reality. Reality is a mirror, and the reality is the primary mirror of your belief system. So we can know what it is that you believe by what's showing up in your reality. Reality is nothing more than a mirror, but it's malleable also. It changes according to what it is that you believe. If you believe, for example, that rich people are good, you're going to start seeing the evidence of rich people being good, and you're going to start seeing philanthropy and rich people doing all this all over the world. But if, on the contrary, you believe that rich people are evil, they're bad, and you can't trust them, then you're going to see evidence of that. I used to believe that every year about the same time I would catch a cold. What would happen? Every year about the same time I'd catch a cold. Then I said, you know what? In 24 hours I can get rid of a cold. So what would happen? 24 hours and I would get rid of a cold. I said, you know what? Why do I have to believe that there's a such thing as a cold anyway? Now I tell myself I don't catch colds. This year, you know what happened? I didn't catch a cold. What happens when we start changing what it is that we believe about reality? Reality is going to begin to acquiesce and shape itself according to what it is that you believe. And you're only going to see the belief or the outpicturing of what it is that you believe. What you're seeing in your world right now, listen, you and two other people, let's go make it easier. You and another person can see the exact same events in life. One can see it as an opportunity, more money's coming, and the other one can see it as despair and this is the worst time ever and I don't know what I'm going to do to survive. What's the difference? Mindset. Two different people, two different mindsets. You start believing differently. It doesn't happen all at once. Some of these things, we got some deep stuff in us. I have some deep stuff in me. As I start looking at my life, my world differently, it starts showing up differently. But you got to be open. If you allow other people, religion, and everything else to dictate to you what it is that you're to believe, then that's the evidence that you're going to see. My goal is not to tell you what to believe, but that you believe. But according to what it is that you believe, that's what's going to show up in your life. I said in one of my talks, I don't even think I posted this mini talk, but it was basically saying this. Why not create a infinite intelligence God, supreme being, that's in favor of us? Why create one that's angry with you, going to throw you hellfire and brimstone? Why create that? Because other people have told you that's what you're to believe. Understand this. Reality isn't fixed. You can believe whatever it is that you want to believe about the divine, and nobody can change that. So if you believe that God is prospering you, wanting to prosper you, to give you a hope in a future, that he came that you may have life and that you may have life more abundantly, give and it shall be given to you. If that's the belief system that you have about your God, that's the belief, and those are the things that are going to show up in your life. But if it's an angry God, I find that angry people preach an angry God. Loving people tend to preach a loving God. Create a God in your own imagination that's supportive of you. Why create otherwise? Why create? You're given to choose. You can create a God like the Jewish people have that wants to prosper them, to give them a hope in a future, to see everything working out for their good, to be the head and not the tail. Why not choose that entity as God, as opposed to this broke, busted, and disgusted one that keeps you in poverty? You have a choice. Choose a God, supreme being, source, infinite intelligence that's supportive of you. Again, my goal is not to tell you what to believe or who to even believe in, but why not choose one more supportive of you? You're given to choose. Okay, move forward. So reality is not fixed. Your identity will shift according to your imagination. You say, what do you mean, coach? For the person, Henry Ford said, the person that believes that they can or believes that they can't, they're correct. When you start imagining yourself being more successful, let me give you my own personal story. I used to believe, and I was, I was painfully shy. Yeah, this guy running his mouth was painfully shy. And I went into the Marine Corps. I'm cutting a lot of stuff out, but I went into the Marine Corps and I was still shy. And I found myself in a place called Korea. And so, but one of the things that I like to do, I probably didn't do it well, but I thought I did, I like to dance. So I would go out, and the goal was to go out and dance. And at first, didn't have a good time because nobody would dance with me. I decided I was going to dance by myself and I was going to have a good time. Once I decided that, and I was okay if I asked someone to dance, if they told me no, my feelings weren't hurt, I just went to next. I just said next. Pretty soon, by the time I left Korea, I was having a great time. I met a lot of people. I was no longer that person that I considered shy. Once you step out in the thing that you say that you want to be, do, or have, even if you don't have the evidence of you being successful in it, what's going to happen is the act of doing is going to bring about a change in you. Even if you do whatever you do at first poorly. There's a guy, many of you may know of him. His name is Mr. Beast. First 6, 8, almost 10 years doing videos, he was terrible, terrible. And he kept doing it, kept showing up. Today, those who know about Mr. Beast know that he's like one of the #1 YouTubers in the world. He kept showing up. He kept learning from his failures. He says this, that let's say that you want to do videos. He says, understand this, your first 100 videos are going to suck. Many of us want to show up and do the videos and we want to, be on cloud 9 and we want to have a great video. It doesn't work like that. I did a 12:30 plan on TikTok, and basically what the 12:30 plan meant was at 12 o'clock for 30 days, I kept showing up and I would talk. The stuff that I learned in those 30 days could be put in a course and sold because it was in the doing. I mean, I learned about camera. I learned about lighting. I learned, what not to do. I tried to do it on my whole point is, creators, Whatever it is that you want to do, start doing it. And I promise you, even after 30 days of starting to do what it is that you want to do, you're going to learn so much from those 30 days of being consistent and persistent in the doing that whether you realize it or not, you're going to be the expert in something, whatever it is that, if it's cryptocurrency, if it's AI, if it's creating content, whatever it is that you want to do, start doing it. Many people want to keep studying. They want to keep looking at other programs. They keep purchasing programs. They keep doing these courses. And they're like, well, when I get everything that I need, then I'll start doing it. We learn about doctors, physicians, lawyers. What they do is practice, but the practice happens after the degree. Your learning starts once you start doing. Everything that you want is on the other side of the doing. You know, I sometimes get frustrated when we're talking like in the Neville Goddard community, because people hear what Neville says, but they don't watch what Neville did and the lifestyle that he led. He says, lift not a finger. Now, that doesn't mean don't do anything. And there is a time when you don't do. Absolutely. But there's also a time of doing. Spirit's going to let you know when it's time to take action or when to sit back and just watch and observe. But what Neville was saying was, don't do it to force it. Don't try to force something to happen. Neville was one of the, like I said, I did something in my Facebook group, and I basically broke down how much money Neville potentially made over what he was doing and how much he was charging at $3, $2, $3 a person at a audience of max capacity of 1,600 people over a 5-day span. That was a lot of money in Neville's time. Neville spoke all the time. So I can guesstimate that he spoke anywhere from 150 engagements to 200 engagements, if not more. I'm being conservative, yearly. And we can know that in part by all the talks that we have from Neville. We don't even have a portion of all those talks that Neville gave. But my whole point was, Neville wasn't this starving speaker that many people in the community want to give the impression. He says that he didn't charge. He didn't charge once you got into the door, but you did pay an entry fee. Now, if I just multiply that entry fee at a capacity of 1,600 people, already we got $3,200, $32,000. I'm sorry, $3,200. Now, but then you multiply that, let's say you spoke 5 days a week on that particular time. You multiply that times 5. You do that repeatedly. Now, I know that he probably didn't always pack it out, but my whole point to you, Neville was not the starving speaker. And then, of course, he had his family's business that he also could pull from. My point to you is, stop buying this broke money thing, this spiritual broke money thing. Many of the spiritual gurus that are teaching this stuff are doing quite well. You know, pastors will get up on this, you know, on a platform and they'll talk about, you know, giving you money. But you're paying that pastor, and I'm not discounting, the pastor is worthy of his labor. What I'm saying, though, it's easy for people to say live a life of poverty when they're not living a life of poverty. Somebody said of Gandhi, they said it costs a lot of money to keep Gandhi in poverty. You got to upkeep that. And I know that money turns people off, but it's turning us off because we've been programmed to be turned off. It's purposeful. You've been programmed to say, well, you'll get yours in the hereafter. That was a programming of the early church. Why was that necessary in the early church? It was necessary because you were dealing with a populace that was very poor. So how can you get poor people to give? You get poor people to give by telling them that they'll give theirs in the hereafter. The kingdom of heaven is in you. It starts now, and it's not in the hereafter. And understand this. Money, cars, and all the stuff that we have in this physical realm is for this physical realm. It's not for heaven. You don't require those things as a spiritual being. It says God is spirit, and those who worship must worship him in spirit and truth. My whole point to you, prosperity, money, so forth, is to be used right now. We've been so programmed, like I said, many people, the second I start speaking on the subject of money, the topic of money, they turn off. That's not my business. My business is for those who want to take their life to the next level, those who are tired of being broke, busted, and disgusted, tired of being in ill health, tired of broken relationships, and so forth. If that's you, then understand you can rewire your reality. Reality is not the fix, but it's what we believe about reality that keeps showing up into what we call reality. As I stated earlier, reality is nothing more than the mirror, but it's a mirror of your predominant thoughts, words, actions, attitudes, feelings, states. When you start changing those, when you start changing your belief system about relationships, about money, about health, your reality mirror is going to reflect a different picture. Let's move forward. So your identity will shift with your imagination when you start acting as if. And we were told early on, again, this is part of the program, they did not want you to imagine. They did not want you to be creative. They wanted to put you in a box. Listen, those who we call the top 1%, they understand how mind works. And the worst person in the school system is a creative person, a person that thinks outside the box. You got to get rid of that person because they're thinking for themselves. They're what they call a troublemaker because they're thinking outside the proverbial box. When you start thinking outside your proverbial box, your church, your family, your friends, they're going to say, he's beside himself because I know his brothers. I know his sister. I know his mother. We knew his father. Speaking of Jesus. When you start transcending and understanding that you're the creator of your reality, and you start communicating and living from that as the creator of your reality, when you start rewriting your past and saying, I don't have to be fixed by that old story, I can change the story, you're going to get different results. But you're going to shake a lot of things up because it's not the way we've been programmed to think. It's literally like that red pill, blue pill moment. We start seeing behind the curtain of the matrix. And for a lot of people that are still operating from the matrix, you become very scary to them because they can no longer control you. Now, I know this stuff sounds deep, but I just want you to understand your reality isn't fixed. This is quantum mechanics. This is science. This is neuroscience. They're proving this stuff over and over again. The reality is only fixed because we believe that it is. And it behooves those who are in power to keep us believing that reality is fixed. It's also been said that there's multiple dimensions of who we are. So we call it states in the Neville Goddard community. You can get into another state and then begin experiencing different results. And it's very easy to slip back into your old state. But the state is really the new body of beliefs. As you begin to pour in new information, as you begin to occupy from that new information, you're going to have the different results of that new information. But you have to persevere. You have to consist. You have to persist and consist. You have to continue in that path. As you do it consistently and persistently, you're going to start seeing results. Now, some of these results, I had started a new workout program. Within the first week or so, I started seeing results of that new workout program. Other things you try, they may take a little bit longer, some a little bit sooner. But you have to understand whatever your predominant thoughts are on any given topic, you're going to only see the evidence of that predominant thought. We call that the RAS, the reticular activating system. It only allows us to focus on one thought at a time as we continue to believe that no matter what it is. And that's why I said, if you're going to have a divine being, God, have one that's in favor of you, not one that's judging and critical and wants to throw you in hellfire and brimstone. Why choose that one? But you're given to choose. Most of most of what we believe isn't something that we decide that we were going to believe. It's programming early on. And we acquiesce because we were trying to learn how to occupy in this state. We said, okay, it's necessary to believe this because this is what everybody else in my society, my community, and so forth believe. So we did that as a survival tool. As we started to believe it, we never questioned it. And we keep getting the results of that belief system. Now I'm challenging you, if what it is that you're experiencing in your life isn't advantageous to what it is that you want in your life, challenge the belief. Take on a new belief that supports who it is that you want to be, do, or have. And understand this, you're given to do so. You don't have to believe what everybody told you for years that you have to believe. I know that's taboo. I know it shakes up the foundation of society, and so, but society is going to be fine with you believing something different. Society is going to be fine. Are there going to be people that are upset and so forth? Absolutely. I had somebody reach out to me years ago. I was teaching some of the principles of Neville Goddard, and she and I used to be in a Bible study group, so she knew, my belief systems and so forth at that time. And she started questioning. Basically, she wanted to have a come home to Jesus moment with me and say, DeCarlo, I'm questioning stuff about Neville Goddard and so forth. And I told her, I said, listen, my relationship with the divine is deeper now than it has ever been when I was in traditional church. But when I started listening to that God was in me, not some entity outside of me, and that this entity called God was one with me, it shook me up because I always had the divine out there. But now I understand. Me and Father are one. When you see me, you see the Father. When I see you, I see the Father, Mother, Source, entity known as God, whatever you call that, infinite intelligence. Don't let other people dictate to you what it is that you believe about money. Make sure that it's what you want to believe about money. Relationships, make sure it's what you want to believe about relationships. God, make sure it's what you want to believe about God. Health, whatever. Decide who it is that, because see, understand this. Whatever it is that you're believing, that's what's going to show up in your life. And I'll say this, what you have in your life right now in this moment is the byproduct of all those beliefs that you've had up until this moment. Why not begin to go back into your past and retell those stories to something more conducive to what it is that you want to show up in your life? Let's move forward. Your imagination creates neural pathways. So what do I mean? When you start telling these new stories, when you start creating these mental images in your mind, what's going to happen is you're going to start rewiring your brain. Now, you say, Coach, why is this important? Okay, let's tell a new story about money. What if you start seeing yourself and you start picturing a story of abundance, prosperity, and money coming to you easily and effortlessly? And that's the story that you start. All of a sudden, you're going to rewire your brain. They call that neuroplasticity. You're going to rewire your brain, and what you're going to start seeing is evidence of how to create money ideals, taking action, because you're rewiring your belief system by those mental pictures. You ever look back on some of those ancient movies or people go into a cave and they see the pictures, the stories of the whoever lived in the cave of, the hunter or, the pharaohs, if you're inside a pharaoh's tomb, they spoke in pictures. Your mind speaks in pictures. So as you start telling those new stories about money, you start imagining money coming to you easily and effortlessly, and how you feel. Don't just imagine, feel it. How does it feel to have that money and not to have? Neville talked about relief, the feeling of relief. If you're dealing with debt and you're like, man, it sure would be a relief not to have any debt. Imagine that relief and being debt free and having money. What's going to happen? Let me say this. What's not going to happen is just for the most part, for 99.9% of us, money's just going to drop out of the sky and all your debts are going to be paid. That's going to be very few. What most often happens is a concept, a belief, an ideal comes up. You start acting upon that concept, that belief, that ideal. Then you start benefiting from that concept, that ideal, that belief. It says, test me herewith and see if I will not love you too. If I will not open up the windows of heaven. What is the windows of heaven? Let's get that straight. The windows of heaven is the mind of men and women. When he talks about opening up the windows of heaven, it's your imagination. You start getting ideals, concepts, belief systems. You start seeing what other people can't see. You start seeing money-making opportunities. You start seeing ways to bless people. And let me say this about money-making opportunities. True money-making opportunities, I hear you, show up as ideals, but they always show up ideals of blessing others. Now, why is this important? When you look at the wealthiest people in the world, Henry Ford, for example, everybody was making cars. Henry Ford said, you know what? I want to make a car that the everyday person can afford. And that's what made him one of the richest men of his time. Bill Gates said, you know, I want to make a operating system. Now, he didn't even make it. He purchased it off somebody else. It doesn't matter. He says, I want to create an operating system. And with that operating system, I want to be able to run these computers. Everybody else thought that the money was in the hardware. Bill Gates understood at that time that money was in the software. He purchased somebody else's operating system. Now, he wanted to sell it to IBM. IBM said, well, no, we're not going to buy it, but we'll lease it from you. It was the best thing that could have ever happened to Bill Gates. If IBM had purchased the DOS system, we probably would not know very little of Bill Gates, if anything. What is my point to you? The windows of heaven is the mind of men and women. God says, test me, give, and see if I will not open up the windows of heaven. When you start giving of your gifts, your talents, your abilities, and we all have them. I said this in another talk. The problem is we're so close to them that we say, well, everybody can do what I do. It's a lie. It's a lie. The people that can do what you can do tend to be in your circle. People that you tend to listen. Let's say Neville Goddard, for example. Most of the world has no clue who Neville Goddard is. Most people. There's a young lady I did an interview with recently, Mr. Lindo and I did an interview with, and she's in the French community, blowing up because she's teaching Neville Goddard to the French community. Now, what if she said, well, you know, there must be a lot of people to teach Neville Goddard in the French community, and she never acted on it. People would not be being blessed by what it is that she has. You take Neville Goddard, the principles, to your work community, to whatever community, and you start teaching what it is you know, you're going to be far ahead of most of the, because most people have no clue who Neville Goddard was. It's like I told you, I had that call to Jesus moment where the young lady reached out to him and says, who's Neville Goddard? You know, to her, it was like, you know, Beelzebub or something, because to her, she didn't know anything about Neville Goddard. But I told her, and yes, most of us are food because we've been so programmed. But I told her, I said, listen, my relationship now with the divine within me is deeper now than it ever has in my religion. And so she didn't have any clue who Neville. Now, had she taken some time, she realized that Neville wasn't teaching anything that was anti-Christ or anti-God. He was teaching you the principles of Scripture and how to apply it to your life, how to take those spiritual principles and make them practical. You start doing that in whatever community. You don't even have to put the term Neville Goddard on it. You could say, listen, I'm just going to teach you these principles. And these principles, when you start understanding how mind works, you'll start getting the benefit. Because understand this, they're not Neville Goddard principles. He taught them. But Neville Goddard was a student, so he was spoken to also by spirit. So some things were divinely inspired. Some things he learned from reading his books. He read thousands of books. He was a lifelong student. So this is why when you go back into that time, you realize that Neville wasn't the only one teaching this. Now, we hear somebody teaching, we say, oh, they must have got that from Neville, because that's our scope of understanding. And, a lot of times people listen to Mr. Lindo and they want him to be a Neville. He's not a Neville, no more than Neville was an Abdullah. And I try to explain this. Mr. Lindo will never be Neville, as no more than Neville would be an Abdullah. I'm sure there were people in Neville's time that says, I wish he would teach more of the principles of Abdullah, but he wasn't called to teach the principles of Abdullah no more than Mr. Lindo, learning from Neville, was called. Mr. Lindo's thing is to teach you how to use your mind, not the principles of Neville. You got three different teachers, Abdullah, Neville, Lindo. All of them had three different purposes. Neville experienced the promise. Mr. Lindo experienced the promise in his own way. Abdullah never, as far as we know, ever experienced the promise. But those were three different journeys. So many of us go about to try to emulate Neville's journey. That's not what we're called to do. We're called to live out our own unique journey. Now, we take the tools that we learned from Neville, Abdullah, Lindo, whomever. We apply those to our lives, but once they become our story, they're going to become uniquely ours, and all of a sudden you're going to be learning new skill sets, new principles that Neville didn't even know. You're not called to be a parrot or a duplicate of Neville Goddard or anybody else. You're called to be uniquely you, powerfully you, beautifully you, genius you. You're called to be you. Now, you take what it is that you learn from these teachers and you make it your own. Because once you start teaching, they will become uniquely yours. Even though it's like looking at Warren Buffett. They talk about, his teacher, and they say, that he learned from, a gentleman, Benjamin, and what he learned from Benjamin. But Warren Buffett didn't stay there, what he learned from Benjamin Graham, and just stay there. He took it and made it uniquely his own. Now, he took some of the principles, but you have to own your own story, take ownership of your own stars. Absolutely, sis. You got to take ownership. But as you do that, the world doesn't need another Neville Goddard. As much as y'all think that it does, it needs a unique version of you. It needs you. And it needs you to share your unique message. Not to be able, like some people just rattle off scripture. Scripture to me is a part of who I am. So I speak scripture as scripture comes out of me. Paul wasn't mimicking Jesus. And that's why there was contention sometimes with Paul when he spoke with some of the other apostles, because he didn't speak like any of the other apostles. He had to call Peter out. He said, Peter, you're in sin because you're actually being hypocritical right now. When you're with the Gentiles, you're eating like the Gentiles. When you're with the Jews, you're acting like the Jews. You need to decide what you want to be. He says, we've been called to liberty. Guys, you got to decide who you're going to be. But you're not called to be Neville Goddard, Joe Dispenza, or anybody else. And sin is absolutely ignorance. It's missing the mark. It's when you're off target. But we use these terms, and a lot of people use these terms to keep you in bondage. They keep you in bondage because what they want to do is control you. When you start thinking for yourself, my goal is never to tell you, as I say over and over again, what to think, but that you think. And according to what it is that you're thinking is going to reproduce your life, period. Now, I'll give you some tools on how to think better. That's my job. But what you do with the tools, that's up to you. But you will at least understand my thoughts control my reality. Don't keep giving your power away to what other people think you should think. Think for yourself and test it and see if it works for you. I was talking in another talk, and we were talking about Neville Goddard, and a coaching client that I was working with, who was also a coach, was working with one of her clients. He says, I've done Neville for 12 years and it's not working. She said, stop doing that. Absolutely. If there's something that you believe about scripture that's not working for you, stop doing that. If it's something in whatever the religious text, if it's not work, if it's something that you've been raised on, stop doing it. There's a story real quick, and 3 generations of women were cooking hams, and they would cut the ends off the ham, and so the last little daughter, Mom, why did we cut the ends off of the ham? She's like, I don't know. Let's ask grandma. Mom said, well, I don't know. Let's ask my mom. Finally, she said, well, when I was growing up in the time of the Depression, we didn't have a pot big enough to put the ham in. And so we had to cut the ends off so that the ham would fit. A lot of things that we're doing and we have no clue of why we're doing it, but just because everybody says that's what we're supposed to do. I don't mean to be a disruptor, but I am. Because I'm not going to do this stuff because everybody else is doing it. And I'm not going to tell you some stuff because everybody else is saying this is what you should say. If it doesn't agree with my spirit, especially when we're talking about controlling other people and stuff like that, I'm not going to tell you that. You're to control yourself. And everybody else is to control themselves. We're not in this mind control game. Can we influence people? Absolutely. Can people influence me? Absolutely. But they're not going to stay there if it's not taking me in the direction that I want to go. Eventually, I'm going to drop you. You may have some limited control, and I may, oh, I was just thinking that. But if that thought ultimately is not taking me to where it is where I'm wanting to go, I'm not going to stay there, no matter what the belief system is. If it's not taking me to my desired end, what it is that I know that I've been called to do, and that's to transform your life, I'm not staying there. And neither should you, no matter what the belief system or who it comes from. Most of what we believe about religion are other people who have studied religion, and this is what they believed. Not because it was in Scripture, but because this was their predominant belief. So now what we're doing is really not believing what Scripture says, but what other people say the Scripture says. When you study it for yourself, you say, well, that's not the revelation I got from it. That's what you go with. You go what God gave to you. Not what DeCarlo or anybody else gives you, what the divine says to you. And I promise you, and oftentimes, it's not going to sound like anybody else. But that's what you're going to be responsible for, what the divine has given to you. Let's go on and wind down. Your future will reflect what it is that you've said about your past. Mr. Lindell says this way, we're always thinking ahead of our evidence. If you're not happy what keeps showing up in your life, then you're going to have to begin changing what it is that you say about your life. This is not always easy because sometimes the programming is so deep. And a lot of times it's clothed in religion. And that religion has been ingrained in us from sometimes even before we were born. People speaking over, our mom's belly and so forth. So I often realize this, that if I was in a totally different environment, I realized that my belief system would totally be different. Now, could it be that in that system that I could have learned different beliefs? Absolutely. My whole point to you, are you believing what it is that you believe because that's what you studied and found that works for you? Or is it because what society says that you're supposed to believe this? About money, about relationships, about health? Is it your culture? Is it your environment? Is it your family? Abraham was told to leave the familiar and go to a land of imagination that I will show you. You're being called to leave what's familiar. If you want to experience abundance, you got to leave the familiar. If you want to experience love and relationship, you got to leave the familiar. If you want to experience anything new in your life, then you got to let go of what's familiar. Thanks for sharing. Your imagination is your gateway to your transformation. When you begin, reality isn't fixed. I know that that's what we've been programmed to believe, but your reality isn't fixed. As you begin changing what you believe about reality, you're going to start seeing different evidence. Start changing what it is that you believe about money, that it comes to you easily and effortlessly. I attract love and relationships that are beneficial to me. My health is improving every day in every way. I'm becoming better and better. You start changing your beliefs about your reality will change. Reality is nothing more than a mirror. Listen, this is football day for some of you, so I don't want to keep you. I love you. For the rest of you that want to come back, about one-ish, I say one-ish because things happen in life. This time next Sunday, I'll see you then, and we'll be discussing, today we focused on imagining your past. Next week, we'll talk about remembering your future and how to create the future that you like. So some of the stuff we'll touch again, but we're going to touch on some totally different stuff. My whole point is to get you to understand that you're creating and you're a powerful creator. but right down up until this moment, you've been creating haphazardly. Thank you. Thank you. Love you guys. And we'll speak to you next week. Have a great and abundant day.